The 7 Dials Mystery, Chapter 6. 7 Dials again. Bundle stared at him. And very slowly the world, which for the last 3/4 of an hour had been upside down, shifted till it stood once more the right way up. It was quite 2 minutes before Bundle spoke. But when she did, it was no longer the panic-stricken girl, but the real Bundle. Cool, efficient, and logical. "How could he be shot?" she said. "I don't know how he could," said the doctor dryly, "but he was. He's got a rifle bullet in him, all right. He bled internally. That's why you didn't notice anything." Bundle nodded. "The question is," the doctor continued, "who shot him? You saw nobody about?" Bundle shook her head. "It's odd," said the doctor. "If it was an accident, you'd expect the fellow who did it would come running to the rescue, unless just possibly he didn't know what he'd done." "There was no one about," said Bundle. "On the road, that is." "It seems to me," said the doctor, "that the poor lad must have been running. The bullet got him just as he passed through the gate, and he came reeling onto the road in consequence." "You didn't hear a shot?" Bundle shook her head. "But I probably shouldn't anyway," she said, with the noise of the car. "Just so? He didn't say anything before he died?" "He muttered a few words, nothing to throw light on the tragedy." "No, he wanted something, I don't know what, told to a friend of his." "Oh, yes, and he mentioned 7 Dials. AMM, said Dr. Castle. Not a likely neighborhood for one of his class. Perhaps his assailant came from there. Well, we needn't worry about that now. You can leave it in my hands. I'll notify the police. You must, of course, leave your name and address, as the police are sure to want to question you. In fact, perhaps you'd better come round to the police station with me now. They might say, I ought to have detained you." They went together in Bundle's car. The police inspector was a slow-speaking man. He was somewhat overawed by Bundle's name and address when she gave it to him, and he took down her statement with great care. "Lads," he said, "that's what it is. Lads practicing. Cruel stupid, them young varmints are. Always loosing off at birds with no consideration for anyone, as may be the other side of a hedge." "What?" The doctor thought it a most unlikely solution, but he realized that the case would soon be in abler hands, and it did not seem worthwhile to make objections. "Name of deceased?" asked the sergeant, moistening his pencil. "He had a card case on him. He appears to have been a Mr. Ronald Devereux, with an address in the Albany." Bundle frowned. The name Ronald Devereux awoke some chord of remembrance. She was sure she had heard it before. It was not until she was halfway back to Chimneys in the car that it came to her. Of course, Ronnie Devereux, Bill's friend in the Foreign Office. He and Bill and, yes, Gerald Wade. As this last realization came to her, Bundle nearly went into the hedge. First Gerald Wade, then Ronnie Devereux. Gary Wade's death might have been natural, the result of carelessness, but Ronnie Devereux's surely bore a more sinister interpretation. And then Bundle remembered something else. 7 Dials. When the dying man had said it, it had seemed vaguely familiar. Now she knew why. Gerald Wade had mentioned 7 Dials in that last letter of his written to his sister on the night before his death, and that again connected up with something else that escaped her. Thinking all these things over, Bundle had slowed down to such a sober pace that nobody would have recognized her. She drove the car round to the garage and went in search of her father. Lord Caterham was happily reading a catalogue of a forthcoming sale of rare editions and was immeasurably astonished to see Bundle. "Even you," he said, "can't have been to London and back in this time." "I haven't been to London," said Bundle. "I ran over a man." "What?" "Only I didn't really. He was shot." "How could he have been?" "I don't know how he could have been, but he was." "But why did you shoot him?" "I didn't shoot him." "You shouldn't shoot people," said Lord Caterham, in a tone of mild remonstrance. "You shouldn't really. I dare say some of them richly deserve it, but all the same, it will lead to trouble." "I tell you I didn't shoot him." "Well, who did?" "Nobody knows," said Bundle. "It's nonsense," said Lord Caterham. "A man can't be shot and run over without anyone having done it." "He wasn't run over," said Bundle. "I thought you said he was." "I said I thought I had." "A tire burst, I suppose," said Lord Caterham. "That does sound like a shot. It says so in detective stories." "You really are perfectly impossible, Father. You don't seem to have the brains of a rabbit." "Not at all," said Lord Caterham. "You come in with a wildly impossible tale about men being run over and shot, and I don't know what, and then you expect me to know all about it by magic." Bundle sighed wearily. "Just attend," she said. "I'll tell you all about it in words of one syllable." "There," she said when she had concluded. "Now, have you got it? Of course, I understand perfectly now. I can make allowances for your being a little upset, my dear. I was not far wrong when I remarked to you before starting out that people looking for trouble usually found it. I am thankful," finished Lord Caterham with a slight shiver, "that I stayed quietly here." He picked up the catalogue again. "Father, where is Seven Dials? It's in the East End somewhere, I fancy. I have frequently observed buses going there, or do I mean Seven Sisters? I have never been there myself, I am thankful to say. Just as well, because I don't fancy it is the sort of spot I should like. And yet, curiously enough, I seem to have heard of it in some connection just lately. You don't know a Jimmy Thesiger, do you?" Lord Caterham was now engrossed in his catalogue once more. He had made an effort to be intelligent on the subject of Seven Dials. This time he made hardly any effort at all. "Thesigar," he murmured vaguely. "Thesigar, one of the Yorkshire Thesigars. That's what I'm asking you. Do attend, Father. This is important." Lord Caterham made a desperate effort to look intelligent without really having to give his mind to the matter. "There are some Yorkshire Thesigars," he said earnestly. "And unless I am mistaken, some Devonshire Thesigars also. Your great-aunt Selina married a Thesiger." "What good is that to me?" cried Bundle. Lord Caterham chuckled. "It was very little good to her, if I remember rightly." "You're impossible," said Bundle, rising. "She'll have to get hold of Bill." "Do, dear," said her father absently as he turned a page. "Certainly, by all means, quite so." Bundle rose to her feet with an impatient sigh. "I wish I could remember what that letter said," she murmured more to herself than aloud. "I didn't read it very carefully. Something about a joke, that the Seven Dials business wasn't a joke." Lord Caterham emerged suddenly from his catalogue. "Seven Dials?" he said. "Of course I've got it now." "Got what?" I know why it sounded so familiar. "George Lomax has been over. Treadwell failed for once and let him in. He was on his way up to town. It seems he is having some political party at the Abbey next week, and he got a warning letter." "What do you mean by a warning letter?" "Well, I don't really know. He didn't go into details. I gather it said beware and trouble is at hand, and all those sort of things. But anyway, it was written from Seven Dials. I distinctly remember his saying so. He was going up to town to consult Scotland Yard about it. You know George?" Bundle nodded. She was well acquainted with that public-spirited cabinet minister, George Lomax, His Majesty's permanent Under-Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, who was shunned by many because of his inveterate habit of quoting from his public speeches in private. In allusion to his bulging eyeballs, he was known to many, Bill Eversleigh, among others, as Cotters. "Tell me," she said, "was Cotters interested at all in Gerald Wade's death?" "Not that I ever heard of. He may have been, of course." Bundle said nothing for some minutes. She was busily engaged in trying to remember the exact wording of the letter she had sent on to Lorraine Wade, and at the same time she was trying to picture the girl to whom it had been written. What sort of a girl was this to whom, apparently, Gerald Wade was so devoted? The more she thought over it, the more it seemed to her that it was an unusual letter for a brother to write. "Did you say the Wade girl was Jerry's half-sister?" she asked suddenly. "Well, of course, strictly speaking, I suppose she wasn't, his sister at all. But her name's Wade, not really. She wasn't old Wade's child. As I was saying, he ran away with his second wife, who was married to a perfect blackguard. I suppose the courts gave the rascally husband the custody of the child, but he certainly didn't avail himself of the privilege. Old Wade got very fond of the child and insisted that she should be called by his name." "I see," said Bundle. "That explains it." "Explains what?" "Something that puzzled me about that letter." "She's rather a pretty girl, I believe," said Lord Caterham. "So I've heard." Bundle went upstairs thoughtfully. She had several objects in view. First, she must find this Jimmy Thesigar. Bill, perhaps, would be helpful there. Ronnie Devereux had been a friend of Bill's. If Jimmy Thesiger was a friend of Ronnie's, the chances were that Bill would know him too. Then there was the girl, Lorraine Wade. It was possible that she could throw some light on the problem of Seven Dials. Evidently. Gary Wade had said something to her about it. His anxiety that she should forget the fact had a sinister suggestion.